So, oh yeah, one thing I forgot to say is that like we're recording separate audio tracks for you and me. So that means basically I pretty much then in the edit mute whoever's not speaking, which means you can basically make as much noise as you want when I'm speaking. If you need to drink, like I drink a lot. I always have like a cup of tea in the beginning and I'll drink that for the first 20 minutes or something. So there's lots of like this in the background. So yeah, you can just do that when I'm speaking and no one's going to ever know.
Great. I'll get my tambourine.
Yeah. That tends to be a common prop for my guests.
I never podcast without my tambourine.
Yeah, exactly. Don't know why tambourine was so funny, but some of this, that was a good choice of instrument.
Some words are just funnier. And some words are funny. Any word is funny if you say it the right way, is a thing that I learned in an improv workshop once, where the guy running the workshop said that, and I immediately was like, no, that can't be true. And he was just like, margarita. And I was like, okay, yeah, right. Any word is funny if you say it like that.
Yeah, I think Rowan Atkinson also has a whole bit about that, although I'm not going to do that because I'll just mess it up. Anyway, tambourines aside, I wanted to start with a very serious journalistic question, which is, so did you or did you not fake having a girlfriend when you appeared on Come Dine With Me?
Wow. I didn't realize there'd be gotcha questions in this interview.
And also, maybe what is Come Dine With Me and why I'm asking that question?
Right. So Come Dine With Me, for those of your listeners who don't live in the UK or maybe have something to do during daytime hours, it is a extremely banal British reality television show where 4 strangers are put together and each of them takes turns hosting a dinner party over the course of a week. I think some version of the show is different than that, but the one I was on was like that. And I was on an episode of this in 2016, I think, kind of by accident. I was living in Oxford at the time, and I was in an improv group there, and someone posted on like our shared Facebook group being like, hey, they're going to make an episode in Oxford, like someone should sign up to do it. And I had never really seen it. I had never really hosted a dinner party before, so I was not a great candidate, but I sent in an application. They came and interviewed me. And like, because I do improv, when the camera's on, I can turn it on. And they were like, they ask you all these questions to get a sense of, like, would you be entertaining on a television show, right? And so they were like, what would happen if, there was an older woman on the show and she was flirting with you? And I was like, well, of course I'd return her affections, but only until the points were in. And, I repeat that for an hour. I played guitar for them. I rapped for them. And so they put me on the show, and also, into a situation where I had no idea what I was doing. But as part of it, you have to film it in a place. Famously, television takes place in the physical world. And I was living in college accommodation at the time. So I had this tiny room with a shared kitchen. And I asked the people who lived on my same hall, if I could for a day film in that kitchen. And one of them said no. She was like, no, I have a lot of studying to do. And I mean, to this day, I can't someone is like, hey, could I just literally for 5 hours, can I make a reality show down the hall from you? And she was like, no, I have a lot of books to read. I mean, good on her. Much more serious scholar than me. And so I needed another place to do it. But the producers were like, well, we can only film in a place that is your residence. And so I was like, well, actually, I'm in the process of moving in with my girlfriend, who wasn't my girlfriend. She was, in fact, the founder of the improv group that I was in, and had a very nice kitchen. But it's reality, no one actually cared, right? It wasn't like the producers were trying for any amount of actual reality. And so they just wanted an excuse to make this work, and so did I. And so I told what I consider a fib more than a lie. But yes, she wasn't my girlfriend. Yeah, and remains not, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I just asked that is because I looked up some stuff about you and found this interview you did with someone talking about this. And because, I hadn't, and I still haven't seen the episode of You With Come Dine With Me. So I was like, what is the story about you faking a girlfriend?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, usually that show is very, light entertainment and nothing really happens. On the episode I was on, a guy had a meltdown and kicked us all out of his house and became a meme and a pariah instantly, overnight. The episode went viral, and to the point where it aired when I was home for Christmas. And when I got on the flight to go back to London, someone turned around their seat and they were like, hey, were you on that episode of Come Dine With Me? And then that kept happening for the rest of the time I lived in the UK. And it keeps happening, like, at random places. Like, in the middle of nowhere in Ohio, someone, like, I was at a wedding, and someone came across the room. I was like, we are that episode, Come Dine With Me? And so, that's why it has continued to haunt me for the rest of my life, and remains the most prominent thing I've ever done, or might ever do. Nothing that I can do can top being in the background of a guy having a meltdown on national television.
Yeah. I mean, the main reason I actually brought this up is because I always wondered, and you kind of answered this already, but why people would want to be on these shows. It never, I mean, and I could never quite figure it out. I mean, I guess maybe for some people, it's like you watch the show a lot, so it's like, oh, cool, it'd be, really nice to be part of that thing that I like. But I always wondered, and then when I saw that you were part of it, I was like, okay, that really doesn't make any sense. Because you don't seem like the person who would watch that a lot, but I don't know.
No, not at all. Yeah, no. I thought it would just be like a stupid way to have a good time. And honestly, during it wasn't. Like, it kind of sucked because you're basically an unpaid actor for those 4 days. Like, they find you during the day and film your reaction to, like, the unveiling of the menu for that night and, like, saying something stupid about it. And then at night, you're at these dinner parties, or you're hosting your dinner party. And, like, it takes a long time. It's very stressful. You don't get paid for it, except they give you 120 pounds to, like, buy the food for the meal. And I've spent probably 60. So in that sense, I made money. I didn't win, not to spoil the ending, but I did tie for second. There's only 4 people, which is to say the guy who called a woman a fat troll got 4th. I tied with the other lady, and the other woman got 1,000 pounds. And I came away with nothing but a story.
Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, I did find it. I once, my roommate at university, she had tickets for, in the UK, it's usually if you go, I don't know what's like in other countries, but if you have a TV show with an audience, then they just, it's a lottery basically who gets those tickets. And so she applied for just one channel, and I think they just gave her randomly 2 shows or something. So, I mean, I had no idea what those shows were, and I can't tell you what they are. It was some sort of quiz show, I don't know. But, I came along just out of curiosity to see what it's like for this kind of TV show to be taped. And I thought that was kind of an interesting, like, not exactly behind the scenes because I was part of the audience, but I don't know. I thought that was kind of interesting for that. And I assume for you was kind of even more, because you're not even behind the scenes, you were part of the scenes.
Yeah, you learn all of these, like, dirty little secrets about how television gets made. Like, that show, Come Dine With Me, is extremely cheap to make because there's only one camera, and they hide this by, like, there's one camera person, and so you'll be, like, pouring some sauce into a pan or something, and they'll tell you to pause in the middle so they can get, like, a close-up of it. So it appears as if there's been 2 cameras the whole time. And this especially comes into play at the end of every night when it looks like on the show, each person gets in their own cab and goes home. And on the way, they talk about the night and then they hold up a card with the rating. In fact, what happens is there's one taxi and we each take turns getting into it. It drives around the corner. We do our little spiel about why we're giving it a 6. We get out of that taxi and get into a real taxi that takes us home. So that's reality television.
Well, I think, I don't know, even if it continues to haunt you to this day, it does sound like it was an interesting experience to be part of.
Yeah, always chase future fun facts about your life, I think, is a good way to live life. Even if they're not good in the moment, they come in handy for the rest of your days on Earth.
Okay, now I feel like I have to find some reality TV series to be part of it. Because first I have to see.
Everybody should do it.
Okay. Yeah, that's a new, what's it called? Bucket list. New item on the bucket list. Anyway. So I guess, I mean, there's a bunch of things we're going to talk about today. This not really being one of them. But one of, for example, you have would you call it a newsletter or more like an essay that's automated to readers, or a Substack?
Yes.
If that's a noun now.
Yes, please subscribe to my essay that's automated to readers. Yeah. It's a huge problem because there's not a good word for it, right? Like, blog sounds too informal and too, like, 2004. Newsletter sounds like it's about the news, and it's not.
Or or
Substack,
something that happened to you. Something. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Substack is accurate, and yet, like, doesn't actually give you any information because you could use Substack to write about anything. So I don't yet have a good word for what this is, other than a series of essays that are automatically sent to the reader. So yes, that is what it is.
Yeah, it seems to me there is this, like, new, since Substack really came out, there's this, like, almost ecosystem of people writing essays again. And
yes.
Yeah. So you have that, and like, talk about two of those parts, and then we have well, I guess one of the papers is basically also part of Substack, from what I understand.
Yes.
And the other is a paper about conversations that you published, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago,
Yep.
something like that. Yeah, maybe about the series of essays automatically sent to readers. The one piece I'd like to start with is called Good Conversation Have Lots of Doorknobs. It's a good title, I guess, because it sounds vaguely confusing and intriguing. So maybe what is a doorknob in a conversation?
Yeah, a doorknob is the way that the best way I could make sense of what psychologists call an affordance. So basically, affordances are ways that you can interact with your environment. So like a doorknob is an affordance. It allows you to open the door, handles on things. I don't know why I'm thinking entirely in terms of things you can grasp with your hands, but basically features in the world that allow you to somehow interact with it or impose your will upon it. Sidewalks are affordances. They give you a place to walk. In a video game, anything you can pick up, is an affordance, whatever. But I think thinking about these things purely in the physical realm limits the actual usefulness of that concept. I think conversations actually also have affordances. There are these doorknobs that you can grasp onto that opens the door to the next stage of the conversation or the next thing to do. And I think good ones have a lot of those doorknobs, a lot of those things that you grasp onto that propels you into the next part. And in the article, I tried to sort of sidestep the way I think a lot of people think about conversations, which is sort of a competition between givers and takers. Like I'm taking attention now, and you give it to me by asking me a question. I give it back to you by asking you a question. That these question askings or interruptions or making statements, this is one way to make a conversation go. But in fact, they're all subtypes of the greater type of conversational affordances. And so I try to give some examples of things in a conversation you can grasp onto and how you grasp onto them. That doesn't have to boil down to we ask each other questions or we just make statements at each other. So that's what I'm trying to do in this article and what I'm inexpertly explaining now.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe to use one example that you give in there of something that is not an afford or that doesn't have an affordance is the question: how many of your grandparents are still alive or are still living?
Yes.
Why? How does that question lack doorknobs?
Yes, there's nowhere to go from there. So if I say one, what would you then say?
Okay.
What's their name?
Yeah.
I
what happened to the other three?
Yes, they died. And these are all ways of making affordances out of nothing, right? Like usually that kind of question, it's a cul-de-sac. It doesn't go anywhere. So ideally, the kinds of questions that you want to ask or be asked, or the kinds of statements that you want to make, allow the other person to grasp onto them and do something additional. Basically, it's juicifying the conversation. It's fattening it up for the slaughter of the next statement, giving people something that they would want to talk about next. And just when I see people talk about conversations, I just don't see them think about it this way. Like often people think like, oh, I'm upset that this person didn't ask me enough questions. Like they didn't take enough interest in me, or this person wouldn't say anything. Like I asked them questions and they didn't do anything. And I think part of it is because like there was probably a conversation that didn't have many of these doorknobs or affordances. There weren't things that allowed people to make the next move in the conversation. It was a bunch of, how many grandparents do you have? Who's your cousin? Like,
how's the weather?
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
but that's what I think. What I really liked about the piece is that I guess it's maybe. I mean, the nice thing about conversations is that they're relevant to anyone. But I think this is particularly relevant for me because I run a podcast where I interview people, and it's not the thing where I have a list of questions and I just read them out loud and the person responds to them, but it's more conversational. And this is something I've really spent time thinking about, like what makes for a good interviewer, because one of the main criticisms you hear of interviews, and that I also had when I started this, was that people said, oh, I don't like this interview. They keep interrupting their guest, right? Like they don't let them answer the question. They just say something. And I mean, I've heard basically lots of people basically told me that, like when I started doing interviews, they're like, don't be one of these people, right? And I completely agreed. But it was kind of interesting to me that once I, read your article on that, I thought that's actually a much more intelligent way of thinking about this whole process, and like how I can really not only keep the conversation going, but also make the guest feel like they're not like, doing the entire heavy lifting of the thing by saying stuff.
Exactly. Like you want to make it easy for the other person to say the next interesting thing. And there's a lot of ways of doing that. I mean, one is asking a question that unlocks something interesting. But another thing is making a statement that they can react to. or honing in on something that they just said that you realize, like, is it a little bit weird or needs explaining and digging into that. And this is the same kind of instinct that I think you hone when you're doing improv, which is sort of where that article was born out of, is you're always looking for the weird thing to then exploit. Like someone has moved in a slightly weird way or said a slightly weird thing. Often they're mistakes, and those often become the cornerstones of the scenes that we do, is noticing and expanding on those things. And when you do those things, when you do things that are slightly weird, when you embrace your own mistakes, you actually make it easier for the other person to react to you as well. But that's getting more into improv theory.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask a bit about improv anyway, so maybe we can just do that now. I mean, so I don't know basically anything about improv, but the one thing I've heard, and maybe you can tell me whether this is true or not, is that the first rule of improv, or one of the first rules, is this yes and. So when someone does something on stage, you kind of go with it rather than saying no. Is that part because there's no affordance to you just blocking something?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's the first thing that you'll learn in improv class, because if you don't do that, you really can't do anything else. If I hand you a plate of spaghetti and say, "Your spaghetti, sir," and you go, "That's not spaghetti, that's my grandfather's ashes," now we don't know what's going on, and neither does the audience, and so we're flailing. And so yes, the first thing that you'll be told is like, if someone says this is a plate of spaghetti, it is, and now react to it. Like, do something, do the and. Improv has done a great job of selling this, like packaging this and doing workshops and writing books about this. And I think all that's great. Like, it's a good rule to learn. But I also think it's like the most basic one. It's a bit like saying the first rule of riding a bike is like, try not to fall off. And I think most of the interesting stuff in improv comes after that. Like, once you agree that these are the basic rules, or maybe a better analogy is it's a little bit like making sure that everybody playing a game of basketball knows the rules, and then everything interesting happens after that. If they don't realize, like, you're not allowed to hold onto the ball and run down to the end of the court, like, you literally can't play the game. But that's not actually the most interesting part of playing basketball, is making sure that all the rules are followed.
Okay, yeah. Is then, I mean, one kind of thing I was curious about was just because I saw that, you've done a lot of comedy and improv and that kind of stuff over the years, that kind of what's something, maybe the affordances is part of that, but like what's something that, I don't know, either you take from it or you think other people can take from it to apply in other situations. I mean, I can't really ask this much more specifically because I don't know much about improv. But
Yeah. Something that has really stuck with me from doing improv for a long time is another rule that I think gets taught a lot less, which is unfortunate because it is, I think, an even better one, which is treat your scene partner like a genius. And in improv, this plays out very specifically that, like, it's not that you're playing the reality of the person you're playing with is literally in this scene an extremely intelligent person, but you act as if every choice that they make is a good choice. You as the improviser do this. You as the character in the scene might hate the choices that they're making and react to them that way. But by doing that, by treating their choices like they are smart choices, you essentially make them smart choices. This is all made up on the spot. The audience is looking to you to understand how they should feel about what's going on. If you look hesitant, or like you're not having a good time, or like you don't like the decision that was just made, the audience feels the same way. And those scenes suck. They suck to be in.
Yeah, you mean like someone does something and you just go like, yeah. Like for a second you look at them like, really? This is, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of times, I mean, this requires going a little far out of your comfort zone. I was in one show where I kind of forget exactly the specifics, but it was basically set up that, like, my character had low blood sugar and someone needed to spit into my mouth to, like, make sure I didn't die. And then she just actually spat into my mouth, and like I saw it coming, and like I didn't really want to have my mouth spat in on stage, but I did, and like I remember that scene because I don't know, the audience, was both grossed out but also thought it was very funny, and that was a place I would have never gone to if I had been like, oh, I'm low on blood sugar, but I have my insulin right here, and like, no problem. But instead I was like, yeah, no, that's a good choice. I am in trouble. We should really do something about this. And that makes for good improv scenes, but it also makes for I think, good relationships with people that not every decision that someone makes is obviously... yeah, sometimes you need someone to spit into your mouth, and if that's what you like, I mean, if you haven't done it before, how do you even know if you don't like it?
Yeah, I mean, that's how you
should try
your fetish, right?
Exactly. You can't have a fetish if you don't sample a lot of activities. But if you treat people as if they know what they're doing, they often rise to the occasion. I mean, this is the idea behind self-fulfilling prophecies. But if you treat people like they don't know what they're doing, or they have nothing worthwhile to say to you, it will be the case, right? That like you will make people stupider by the way that you treat them. And it's not like you can turn every decision into an amazing decision by treating it that way. And some decisions are bad and we shouldn't do them. But there is this huge leeway in the middle where the expectations that you bring to someone have a big influence on what they actually go on to do.
I have one thing I noticed about the most basic rule of improv, the yes and. I just had one brief question about that. And the one thing I was curious about is that I noticed that, one duo of people I really like watching is Conan O'Brien and Bill Burr. I think the two of them really work very well together. And the one thing I noticed is that basically what happens is that Bill Burr will say something kind of controversial, and then Conan will be, wait a minute. He kind of almost goes against it, right? He says wait, that can't be right. And then he repeats basically what Bill Burr said, and then Bill Burr will go on a rant. Is that something that only works because Bill Burr is a professional stand-up comedian? Or... yeah, because he still kind of repeats and just goes with it. Yeah. I don't know whether...
Yeah. I actually think, if you have a little bit of skill in improv, I think that's actually a great strategy. So this is sort of, I don't know if there's a great word for it, calling someone or pointing out a weird thing. And I think it's totally good so long as the other person commits to what they did. So often a great scene will come from someone saying something slightly wrong or just making some big choice and another person being like, what? And becoming the straight man. I'm going to be in opposition to what you believe, and now I'm going to put you on the spot and you're going to have to defend it. And I really like being on both sides of that. That if I'm ever yes, there's there's 40 states in the United States, and someone's like, what? And it could have been just a complete mistake that I made. I'm like, yeah, 40 states. And either we're in a reality where something has happened to the remaining 10 states, or I'm a person who refuses to believe that Nebraska exists, or something. We're going to discover what that is. But this is way more interesting than the scene we did where we're yes, all 50 states. Now we can list them. Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I guess I maybe don't have too much to say about this piece anymore. I just thought it was a really cool way of, I guess it just really pointed in a new perspective on something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I'll try not to be too self-aware of whether I'm affording you things or not during this conversation. But it's bound to happen, basically, because now it's just in my head, right? It's don't make dead-end statements or don't... the same with questions, questions that are super specific and you just say 3 is your response or whatever. Yeah, it doesn't really lead anywhere.
And making statements can also be offering affordances. You don't have to have a question mark at the end to invite the other person to speak. If you make a point that has something generative in it, or something to disagree with, or something to expand upon, so long as the other person is doing their part as well, then they can grab that doorknob and push on to the next thing too.
So basically what we just did, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And then you expanded on it. Yeah. Very nicely done. Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. I had a kind of more general kind of question about... the most generic question almost, which is why you started doing a Substack, and why did you do it? Is it that, I don't know, you saw everyone else do it and thought, I want to do that too? Or you're, I don't know, writing a book and you need followers or something? What's the,
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why. Here's one way of telling the story. There are many stories that went into this, but that conversation paper that you mentioned, not the post, but this paper, Do Conversations End When People Want Them To, that I published a few years ago. When I published that paper, it came out in a big journal. It got a lot of media attention. And the average article about my paper was a little bit wrong. And some of them were very wrong. And that was something that I worked on for 4 years. And I had written it with my advisor, who's very good at structuring these papers and writing them very clearly. And it just felt like we had the best chance possible to write a paper that people would understand. And instead, there were people in the middle who read the paper, didn't understand it, and then wrote the wrong version of it to people in general. And so what happened was, of all the people who encountered my research, the average person was actually worse off for that having happened. Which is if you take science seriously, is a huge tragedy to work all this time and to produce something that you believe to be true. And now everybody actually believes more the opposite of it. And so I was like, how could I possibly do that? And so one reason I wanted to start the Substack was to write about research and about psychology in words that people can understand. So there didn't have to be a translator in the middle who would get it wrong and give people the wrong idea. I might still give people the wrong idea, but that's at least my fault. Like it's not because we're feeding this into a sort of bad Google Translate. That's one reason. But the reason why it's continued is basically when I'm writing in this mode, I feel like I'm in that scene in the original Indiana Jones where he like puts the staff into kind of the crypt and the light shines through like the ruby and it illuminates this place on the map. Well, it just feels like I'm in the right place at the right time doing the right thing. It feels like that in a more dramatic way, which is not how it feels when I'm trying to write a scientific paper. When I'm doing that, I feel like I am speaking a third language that I have sort of like a fourth grader's level of understanding about. And it's like, why work so hard to produce these papers that people don't read, or when they do, they misunderstand them because they have to be written in this way that is like deliberately dense and even misleading? I'd rather write in the words that I think are right, make it accessible to anybody. And in doing so, like actually come to understand what I'm writing or what I'm doing better. Because if you can't explain it to someone who doesn't have expertise in the domain, you don't actually understand what you're doing. Yeah, so those are some of the reasons. Also, I have some friends who blog under the name Slime Mold Time Mold, which is a very funny name for a blog, and they would not stop bothering me until I started a blog. And so I did in part to get them to stop annoying me with it, which I'm glad that they did. It has changed my life.
Okay, how? Sorry, that's very obvious next question. How is it?
Yeah. It is sort of made me believe that it is possible to do this. That I think all through graduate school and in my postdoc, I figured like if you want to do psychological research and you want to do it, freely, you don't want to do it at the behest of like Google or Facebook or something like that, where you're answering the questions that they want you to answer. You have to be an academic. Like you need a position in a university. And it is becoming more and more possible that like that might not need to happen. That if you can find some way of paying your bills otherwise, like you can keep doing what you're doing. Now, this is easier for psychology where like it doesn't take a ton of money. Like it's not that hard to get participants. Like I don't know exactly what I would do if I was a biologist and I needed like petri dishes or whatever. Maybe it would look different. But the idea that I could do...
Not sure that's the expensive part, but yeah.
Yeah, we're running out of these petri dishes and all these pipettes. We need more cadavers.
But I know what you mean. Yeah, there are definitely very expensive parts to their research.
Like how cool is it that like if you never had to publish in a journal again, but you still got to do research? For me anyway, the research I would do, it would be very different. I mean, that's what I've been trying to do recently. And I think for a lot of people, it would be very different because it's like, well, suddenly I don't have to write in the form that's going to be published in a journal. I can like do weird stuff. I can like be very exploratory. And I can actually be transparent. So not to get too deep into the last post that I did, but it was a research paper, but written in this way, completely transparently. So like we put the data and the code and the materials online. So if you want to see exactly what we did, you can. But then we just write about it in a way that makes it most understandable. And it also allows us to admit things like, we don't know why this happened, or we forgot why we ran study 8. Things you could never say in a paper, but you should say. Like to not say them is a lie. And like, as a scientist, like, you got to make a lot of compromises in your life, but you shouldn't compromise on something that you really value. And for me, like scientific integrity, like trying to discover the truth is something I really value. And so why would I ever want to do it in a way that makes me compromise on that? Now, maybe it won't work. I don't know. Maybe I won't ultimately be able to make a living doing this. But someone's got to try. And I would definitely like to live in a world where people are trying, and hopefully some people are succeeding. And I started to figure like, okay, if not me, then who? And so that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to me because I guess, I mean, there's, like with your blog post for the podcast, there's many different reasons. And I guess one reason why I'm still doing it is because there are so many reasons for why I'm doing this. But yeah, one of them is also this, exactly what you just mentioned, this idea of like, I really like doing research. I don't like lots of what happens with academia. I feel like the experience I've made are maybe not as bad as what many other people have said, but I guess maybe in Germany, there's just the whole bureaucracy thing, which is probably not less than in other countries, let's put it that way. And yeah, it's just like when you see where, I don't know, for me, it seems like when I see new PIs, it seems like, and I don't know what this is like for even more senior people, but at least for new PIs, it seems like they really want to do science and they're really excited to have a lab, and then they spend time filling in paper forms and forms online and sending emails and like just doing anything but science. And I don't know, to some extent, it seems to me like there's this trade-off, like you can have your own group and explore your own questions if you're willing to just do something else for most of your days. And I'm not sure that's a compromise I want to do. And yeah, so I mean, same thing. Like, I mean, right now I'm not only not making money from this, I'm putting money into this with the podcast, but
that's called an investment.
yeah, exactly. It's not a money drain; it's an investment. No, I mean it just doesn't cost that much. But yeah, but it's the same kind of idea. Like, who knows? Maybe like if I continue doing this, people like listening to us, then I'll have like a way of, I don't know, having like a part-time researcher position or whatever, right? And then the rest of the salary I can get through other ways. And then, yeah, exactly what you said. You have this freedom without the constraints that academia currently has for people who want to do science.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. And it just wouldn't have been possible, I think, until very recently. But it's just becoming more and more clearer and clearer, I guess, that people are willing to pay for something that they value, even if they don't have to pay for it. I mean, that's the idea behind Substack and Patreon. And I think there's something like very beautiful about that, of basically recreating in miniature kind of the way science used to be done, that someone would have a patron and that would give them, some freedom, but also some constraint. And it's not like that's some perfect system or like, we should go back to Medici's running the show, but it has some advantages. And it certainly feels like at least the entire ecosystem shouldn't be what we have right now. And a lot of people are pointing out, and I've written about this as well, that it really seems like on a lot of metrics, we aren't getting the same bang for our buck from science as we did pre-1970. That if you look at research output per capita of researcher from 1970 onward, like we had a ton of researchers, but don't actually seem to like get as much progress out. I wrote this article about why people think that's because like ideas are getting harder to find. I think that's totally wrong, but I think it does have a lot to do with what are those researchers doing all day? It's not research mainly. It's applying for grants. It's filling out forms. It's doing all the things necessary to make a very bureaucratized version of research happen. Or it's all the time that it takes to get something published. Like, so much of my time over the past 2 years has been spent reading walls of text sent to me by reviewers and writing walls of text back to them. Things that, it's not even the reviews themselves that I take issue with. It's the fact that like we could have gotten on the phone and done this in 15 minutes. But instead this is going to unfold over the course of 3 months because like there was this one line that like you slightly misunderstood and now I have to write this whole paragraph about how you were wrong about that. And I'm just pleading with the editor to make this all go away. Like, man, what a waste of time. I read an article that apparently it takes 15,000 person years every year, the process of reviewing papers. It's like $1.5 billion worth of time. For, most of these papers are never cited. And even if they are, half of them are either fraudulent or misleading or whatever. So like, what is all this for?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I also once did a review for a paper where I thought like, it's fine. Like it was just like, I mean, I have to point out some things, and there was some things that, obviously like wrote some stuff, but my general impression was like, just publish it. It doesn't really make much of a difference. It's not going to change the world. It's all right. But then instead it ends up being this like, long process of doing it properly. And
I think everything should be published, and then we should review the things that matter. This is a post that I'm going to write in the future, that there's no reason to prevent something from being published in the first place. We think that we are preventing misinformation from getting out. Anyone who's ever read these papers knows that we are not succeeding at doing that. Or like go to Retraction Watch and see like the hundreds of papers that have been retracted, which is obviously a super high bar. Most papers that are fraudulent or flawed in some way never get retracted. So it's clearly not providing like quality assurance. A lot of these papers actually don't matter in the first place. We'd actually save a lot of time if everyone just ignored them, or they might not get produced in the first place if everybody could just ignore them. But they can't, because every paper must be reviewed. And in fact, some papers are reviewed many times because they get rejected and then reviewed in the next journal and then reviewed in the next journal. So like, why not just put everything out? And then if you think a finding is important and wrong, you can write a review, or important and like needs to be explained further or whatever, write a review. That's what we were trying to do, my friend Ethan and I, on this last post that I published that's like, here is the paper. You can review it if you want to. Like, you can see all the methods in the data. If you don't think it's worthwhile, you can just keep scrolling.
Yeah. I mean, I want to talk about that a bit more in a second, but just briefly, for anyone who's more interested in the fraudulent side and how we're not really correcting for that, I did an episode with Joe Hilgard that I'll put in the description. And by the way, I put like links to everything we discussed in the description. But yeah, he basically had this data from some Chinese researcher on a field that he happened to be interested in. And it was basically this one person said they collected like data sets with like, it was like 3 papers, each with like 3,000 people or something. And in that field, all the other papers had like 200 people or something in it. And then he just had this like year-long protracted process of can I see the data, please, for this? And then the guy was actually dumb enough to actually send him his falsified data. So then he basically was like, okay, here's what the data usually looks like from this field. And you'd have like normal distributions and stuff. And here's the data from this guy. It was just like a square of data that was just like clearly he just typed in or whatever. And I talked to Joe like 1.5 years ago or something, and that was already like 2 years after he started the whole process. And I think some of the papers are still not retracted, right? So it's, it's not great.
It's carnage. And I can't believe that
sorry, and just very briefly,
this idea.
Sorry to interrupt, but like one thing is he is dedicated to getting these papers retracted, right? I have another thing. The reason I contacted him is because I saw a paper with major flaws in it. Like some of the stats just don't add up. I haven't been bothered yet to contact the authors and say like, are you aware that this literally doesn't make sense? Because I just don't have the time to get around to it. So yeah, if it takes that long for someone who really puts his foot down on it, then yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Most of these will never, because like nobody would bother to read them in the first place, or bother to read them closely enough to realize that something's wrong, and then do all of that annoying work for no incentive to get the record corrected. Which is why I think it's extremely unfortunate that I think among the public there is this idea that like peer-reviewed research is held to some like level, like some quality assurance standard, and like basically it's not. I mean, you can't like photocopy your butt and mail it to, PNAS and have them publish it. But honestly, there's eventually going to be a journal where that would work. People have done this before, right? Like, I think there was someone who got a paper published that was just like, are we allowed to swear? There's a swear word in it.
Yeah. Just swear.
I think what they wrote was, take me off your fucking mailing list.
Yeah.
And I think did you see this? It's something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember.
And it got in some predatory journal. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but there's a difference, right? Like one thing is you have a predatory journal that literally just exists to make money. But the problem is that there's also in normal journals that, you still have not exactly that problem, but others.
Yeah. And like all of this would be, I think, fine if it didn't have the facade of quality on top of it. That like, if we weren't pretending that these things are trustworthy, if all of this was just like, look, these are people making claims, and like, if you really want to know whether the claim is true or not, you actually have to do some work. Like, you can't outsource your trust to someone else. And if you don't want to do that, that's totally fine. Like, you don't have to become a scientist or like be very involved in this process, but it also means that you can't have strong convictions about, these scientific issues, like what's true and what's not. And that's fine. Like, I feel that way about virtually all of science except for what I do personally. Like, I don't know anything about quantum computing, and like when people make claims about it or something, I just have to go like, well, I don't know, like maybe it sounds plausible to me or not. But if I really want to make a claim, I actually have to do some work and gain some expertise to do it. And like, that's the price of admission. Like, I don't get to be like, well, it was in science, so it must be true and good. It's like, honestly, if anything, it might be the opposite, because science is not optimizing for the most trustworthy research. It's optimizing for that in addition to like research, that's broadly interesting or something like that. So unlike another journal, like maybe it's less trustworthy. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent here, but I think it's unfortunate that in the public, people are like, oh, peer-reviewed research, like someone has done some quality checks on it, and it just hasn't happened. I mean, like, the most likely problem with a paper is like something has gone wrong with the data, either on purpose or just by mistake, right? One column got mislabeled or one line of code is wrong. And nobody ever looks at that when they're reviewing because it's so tedious and hard. And sometimes you don't even have to submit the data. So we can't pretend that we've like held these things to any standard if we haven't looked at the most basic ways that they could be wrong. And if instead what we've basically done is sort of like, artistic criticism, they're just like, oh, I liked this about the paper and I didn't like that. And like, this didn't add up to me, as if it's a movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the third act. Great ending. Yeah.
Yes.
I can't remember exactly how we got to this topic anymore, so I'll just make a hard break. So how much time do you spend on your Substack? Is it something that's, you do like an occasional, like, a Saturday a month, or I don't know, like, I can't remember, do you publish once per month, or is it just irregular? I can't remember.
I publish every other week, so twice per month.
Twice per month, okay.
On average. Yeah. It takes a long time, and it feels like it is... it's sort of like trying to answer the question of like how much time you spend on research. I mean, you can count the time that you spend with fingers on keys, but like really the time that you spend is every waking moment of your life having these ideas percolating in your head and rewriting sentences in your head. And only some of that is literally spent on task. So it feels like something that is always running in the background, whether or not I'm running it in the foreground as well.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that. Definitely.
And that's in part because like the way that I want to write is like I want to bake these ideas until they are done. And it's a process that like really can't be sped up. There's just no way of doing it faster. Like it takes the time that it takes. And sometimes it's just like I stare at a paragraph for 2 hours and then I delete it. And that's what it takes to like produce the thing that I feel proud of. And I don't want to put out anything less than that.
To be fair, I feel like that's a sentence of someone who actually writes like that. Like that you actually that it's probably going to be good what you write if someone says something like that, because that's not easy to do. The whole kill your darlings thing. That's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, I found the way that I do it is I never literally delete anything. I copy and paste it to the bottom of the document, like below a line. And I know that a piece is getting closer to done when that graveyard is more full of bodies, because it means that I've thought a lot about this. And like I've thought down angles that turned out to be dead ends. And now I have found like the way to the end of this maze is a way that I feel about it. Sometimes it just fills up and I'm like, actually, there's not enough above ground. Everything's been buried and like this post isn't going to work. And then I move on to the next thing.
Yeah. I have a question about like how you fit this in with, because you're still, what exactly, you're doing research and teaching, or that's, maybe you can elaborate a bit on that later, but you're basically still, you have a job. It's not like you're actually already doing Substack as a
Yes.
full-time thing. So I'm just curious how you fit that in, and in particular, maybe I'll ask the other question afterwards.
Yeah. So right now I'm a postdoc at the business school at Columbia, and the most formal part of that job is I teach 2 sections of the negotiation class to MBAs or executive MBAs, people getting master's degrees in business. But a nice thing about this position is I only teach one semester per year, and I teach all on the same day. So like this spring, I'll teach all day Saturday. And the rest of the time is mine to do research as I see fit. So some of that time I spend doing what I think of as like conventional research, I guess, the research that is destined toward a journal. Although more and more I'm trying to convince my co-authors to not do that and to do the thing that I just did with this paper on Substack. And so that's part of how I marry the two and can do both at the same time. And now I can point out to, and I've convinced one of my co-authors already to do this on a project that we're working on, that I can point out, like, I posted that paper on SciArchive, the preprint server or whatever, with just a way of, posting PDFs supposedly permanently on the internet. And I didn't even promote it in any way. Like, I hadn't posted it on the blog yet. I posted the day before because I wanted to link to it in my blog post, which was just going to be the same thing. But and then I woke up to the next day that it had been viewed tens of thousands of times and downloaded thousands of times, because there's a Twitter bot that tweets out whenever someone uploads a new paper to that website. And someone had just seen it, or a few people had seen it and started retweeting it and talking about it. And so more people saw that paper than they would have if it got into whatever journal it might have ultimately gone to. And so now I can point that out to my co-authors and be like, this is going to get more attention if we write it this way. It's going to be way more fun and way faster. And so what's the reason not to, other than we know that this is the currency of our realm and we're taking a risk by doing it this way.
Okay, so just to interrupt, but that's really interesting to me, because as I wrote to you when I invited you, so basically I was probably, I'm not responsible, I didn't retweet or anything, so I'm not responsible for the spread, but I was one of the first 30 people or something to see your thing, because I was literally wasting time on Twitter. And then it just popped up. The Sayaka things could be better. This thing just popped up, right? And sometimes this thing, the Sayaka I've bought tweets things that aren't particularly good. You click on them and go like, what the hell is this? And then when I saw this thing called Things Could Be Better, I was like, what is this? Like, this looks so unprofessional. Which idiot did that? So I just clicked on it and started reading. Like, actually, this is really interesting. And then, I realized that you were the person whose other stuff I'd already read. But
it's me. I'm the idiot.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it turns out it wasn't an idiot. But what I found interesting is then the next day, I went also, and it's like 30,000 downloads or something, or 2 days later or something. And I assumed that this was because you linked in your newsletter, and that's why it got all those downloads or views or whatever, right? But that's really interesting to me that was independent
totally
of that.
The other way around, yeah. Yeah, and it was sort of annoying at the time too, because I want to drive traffic to my blog where I'm going to post the next thing, rather than to the SciArchive page where if you see it, there's no way for you to see the next thing that's coming. And so if I'd known that was going to happen, I would have done it the other way around, I guess. But still, it was very serendipitous, and it made me feel like this is possible, that that people will read your stuff even if it doesn't come out in a journal. And in fact, they'll read it from top to bottom if you write it in a way that invites them to. That, I think, was the most heartwarming thing about doing this, is people would post screenshots or react to things that are at the end of the article. And I can't remember the last time I read a journal article from beginning to end. And I don't want it sucks. It's so
really
bad.
I actually always do that. But I think I'm an outlier in that.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you like it?
I mean, I might skip over some of the statistical details, but yeah, often I do.
Wow. Well, you are a better man than I. I despair whenever I find a paper. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to be fair, I haven't actually read that many papers recently, but I feel like maybe it's just because I was in the beginning of my PhD and I was new to the area, so I really wanted to get a sense of what people were talking. Maybe it was something like that, but yeah, usually I do. Maybe that's also why I have a strong preference over shorter papers. If it's 2-digit page, it's like, am I really going to read 12 pages of a paper? So maybe it comes from that. But at least I used to. We'll see how long that continues.
Yes. Well, how many more papers you could write or you could read if they were all written like this?
Yeah, I mean, but let's be honest, you have a very great ending. Your last paragraph is a pretty great way of ending a paper. I think we also can't hold other papers to that standard, right?
No. And you only get to do this the first time once. But I think there's a whole world here that hasn't been explored. I think there's a lot of untrammeled snow that comes from people speaking in their honest voice. And the thing about doing that is everyone has a different one. And so there are so many people that I'd love to read the paper that they could write if they could be totally honest and write it as if they were telling it to me. Those papers I think would be way more varied and interesting. So I think there's still a lot of innovation left. I think this is completely the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious. Do you think that it's really interesting? I saw one person, so I did see a few people tweet about it. And interestingly, one person was kind of a bit negative about it, because one person was like, not that the article was bad, but said, can we please stop raving about this article? This is just going to inspire another wave of people doing exactly that. And I think there was because
I hope so.
Well, but that's the question, right? Because I think one reason why your article worked is because you're pretty good at writing, right? And I think lots of people, I can really see lots of papers coming out in the style, and you're like, yeah, you're not that funny. You're just not that good. But do you also think that maybe the actual thing I wanted to ask is I feel like part of the reason why this got so much attention is because it was so unusual. But as soon as even you do a second one that's exactly as good, it's probably going to, I don't know, is it going to get half as much attention? Or is it, because the novelty of an article being like that is going to wear off probably pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, I think, articles are going to have to live or die on their own merits, right? They can't be a novelty every time. But I still think that actually the challenge is going to be producing an article that's interesting. And the easy part is writing about it in a way that's accessible. Because it's hard to do both, because if the idea of the paper sucks, if you write about it in a way that's accessible, it's going to be painfully obvious to everybody in a way that it's not when you have this facade of the formal journal language around it that makes it seem like things are serious and important when in fact they're not. I also think, I mean, yeah, I have the benefit of, having a background in comedy. I write a lot, and so this comes more naturally. But I think actually for everybody, writing in their actual voice comes more naturally than writing in this fake scientific voice. And they would write better if they allowed themselves to do it. I think it might take a little bit to get the rust off, but we all have to be trained to write in this way that's totally foreign to us. But we all speak to each other normally in our lives. We give talks that are a little bit closer to the way I think we should express these ideas. And if you want to do this, you still get held to the same scientific standards, right? You can't write a paper using informal language and refuse to share your actual methods and data and code. You have to hold yourself to a higher standard than a standard journal article, which doesn't have to do that. Often, you might get a little badge if you do it. Sometimes they'll make you do it, but often you don't have to. And so I think you also have to do the things required for scientific integrity. And so if people did even just that, that would be a huge benefit, I think.
Is it almost because you don't have a kind of formalized, this was accepted into an article and is slightly weirdly written facade to hide behind? I don't know. It seems like in a way it's easy to dismiss the whole thing as a joke, right? Here's someone who wanted to write a funny article. But as soon as people actually take it seriously as an article, then you have to, your methods have to be completely solid. Otherwise,
yes.
I guess it's a more open, just more transparent way of conveying what you actually did because you don't have much to hide behind.
Yeah. I also think someone said this about it, that it feels more like a more appropriate tone for the level of evidence that we're able to provide, that what we did and what most of psychology is these days is we asked some stupid questions to people on the internet and here's what we found. Yeah. And we can pretend that we did something more serious than that, but that's an inherently kind of silly thing to do. And obviously I think there are important things we can learn from doing it, but that is what we did. And so to pretend that it was some kind of very serious academic escapade is not consistent with the quality of the evidence that we actually have to present. And then something that turned out to be very heartwarming is that when you present, when you go low status, kind of another term from improv, that people actually want to help you more than they want to hurt you. If this had come out in Nature, people would be pissed. They'd be like, this shit's in Nature? This is bullshit. I can't believe this. And if we're just we're two dumbasses, here are our studies. People emailed me unsolicited reviews being here's how I think you can make this better. In very kind language. They actually wanted to help us, unlike reviewers who always want to hurt you. So I'd much rather do science like that, put it out there. And if people think it's worth their time to respond to and try to make it better, that's the greatest honor that we could receive. That they weren't paying attention to it because they had to, because they were assigned to review it.
Okay, so I always assumed, always meaning since you posted it 2 weeks ago, whatever, I assumed that you were going to submit this as a formal article somewhere. Is that wrong then? Because now from talking to you, it sounds okay.
No.
So this is the...
that is the end game.
So what's your... Okay, yes. So then... I mean, that seems basically you're actively trying to harm your career by not publishing in, right? Because our currency is publications in academic journals. So how do you think about that? Yeah. What's the thought process?
Yeah. Isn't it the stupidest thing you could do? I guess I feel like I'm just stupid enough to do it because I believe in it. And I mean, it's a costly signal, right? I actually believe this is the right thing to do and I'm willing to risk something to do it. Everybody likes to sit around and complain about all the ways that academia is bad. Nobody is willing to risk anything to ever improve it. And so it's going to remain bad in all the ways that people hate unless someone's willing to do something. And what I'm willing to do is look like a huge buffoon in order to change it in the way that I think it should be changed. Now, I do this in part with the hope that if academia doesn't work out for me, that I might be able to do something else. And that career is, I think, furthered by doing exactly the thing that I think is right to do. And so, if someone was just starting out and didn't possibly have that option, I don't know. I think I'd still tell them, still do the right thing. And I think doing the right thing will ultimately lead you to a life that is better, even if it isn't the life that you expected. Because I don't know. I mean, my PhD advisor, Dan, put it this way. Dan, by the way, disagrees with a lot of what I'm doing here productively and politely. But we argue about this all the time. But I always quote him back to him, which is he would tell me in graduate school, he'd be like, the reward for compromise is the opportunity to compromise further. Yes, you can get you maybe can get an academic job if you write these stupid articles and you spam them in journals and you do all the things you're supposed to do. And your reward will be a lifetime of getting to do exactly that.
Yeah.
And people have this myth that eventually you get tenure and then no, it doesn't work. I just don't think you can actually live your life one way, up until the time you hit 40 and then suddenly switch and do some other thing. It just doesn't work like that. Not to mention, you still have to work with people who are constrained by the system.
Exactly. I think that's the main thing, right? You still have graduate students. And unless they're I guess you could maybe be the first one to just have a cohort of graduate students who do exactly what, who don't care just like you because you've selected for them with your public persona.
I'd love it.
For most other people, that's not going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that would be my dream, because imagine those people, I think, don't make it in academia right now. We talk about the leaky pipeline, and I think nobody talks about the fact that we exclude all these people who are just slightly weird is their problem, or they aren't willing to pretend the way the rest of us are, that we're all doing something very serious and important all the time when we know that we're not. It always struck me as strange that I didn't meet more strange people in academia. They had their personality had oddities, but their ideas were never weird. They were always within the mainstream, because you have to be. You can't be doing really weird. You can't get it published and you're going to get kicked out. You're not going to get into grad school in the first place, which I think is a tragic. Some of those weird ideas, maybe most of those weird ideas are bad, but a few of them might be revolutionary, but we'll never get them if everybody has to do basically the same thing, just little variations on it, which I think is another reason why we might have way less progress, or scientific progress per capita, than we did before, when I'm not going to be willing to claim that it was just kind of the Wild West, but I think it was more so before, where you could do weirder stuff and still succeed.
Yeah. And then maybe a slight, not exactly personal question, but then about you, how did you then, because not only did you get into graduate school, you got into pretty good schools all along. So it sounds like you would be exactly the kind of person who would not, who would follow the straight path along, right? Not only because it's worked for you so far and you probably have now an easier path to continue along this path than others, but also because, you're exactly the kind of person who shouldn't have weird ideas, right? But how did you manage to do both then?
Yes. I don't know. Maybe, and maybe I'm not even that weird. I'm weird enough, I guess, to try this. But I've always felt this weird paradox that you would think that getting some kind of affirmation, like a credential from an elite university, would make you more adventurous, allow you to take more risks. Because now it's basically if you're playing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you sort of hit one of those points where it's you're at least walking away with $25,000. So now you can gamble. But it doesn't, everybody knows it doesn't work that way. The more elite your status, the less you're willing to take risks because you have more to lose. And so instead of expanding your opportunities, it narrows them to this tiny, tiny band of things that it's okay for you to do, which I think is a huge tragedy. It's just a huge waste of that opportunity. And I'd much rather feel okay, look, I feel affirmed. I don't doubt that I'm smart and I'm capable and I can do this, and people can tell me otherwise and I won't believe them. I have just enough in the bank to feel good. Now I'm going to use that to actually do something other than just be but how can I increase my bank account of accolades until I die? And then what? They just all disappear? It just seems like a waste of life.
So what's the... what exactly is the... maybe this is the wrong word, but vision here, or what... I mean, by you, actively now publishing some stuff that you probably could publish in very high journals, I would imagine, but actively publishing somewhere else, what's exactly the strategy here? Is it just this feels right and I don't know where this is going to lead? Or is it a kind of thing where you're okay, let's abolish the journal system and I'm going to do it this way? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess I have a half-baked plan, which is predicated on the idea that, and I think, thank goodness this is true, it's not like there's someone at the center of all science pulling all the levers and deciding that this is the way that we do things. And so it's not like I'm advocating for that person to do something different because that person doesn't exist. All I can say for sure is I'm sure that this is the right choice for me. When I write in this way, I do work that's better. I reach more people. They understand what I say, rather than misleading them with, an article that's much fancier, but ultimately puts the wrong information in people's heads. So I've no doubt that this is better for me. I think that it's better for pretty much everybody who does what I do, that they'd be better off if they did this, and I'd like to encourage them to do it. But honestly, the group that I am most excited about would be inviting in people who currently like can't participate in the process of science because we've built such a thick moat around our ivory tower that there are so many smart people out there who have interesting questions to ask and who aren't infected with all the assumptions that just like sort of concretize inside their head and make it impossible for them to ask interesting, weird questions. Like, what if they could actually do science? I think there's this huge untapped resource out there that we've basically professionalized them out of being able to do science. If there's a way that I can invite those people back in, that I think would be revolutionary. And that's what I would be most excited about, is creating a community of people who do that. And this isn't historically unprecedented. I mean, the last post that I put up yesterday was a review of an autobiography of Francis Galton, who is most notorious for inventing eugenics. So this isn't a story about how to be a great person, but it was a window into a time when this was sort of the approach of science. Like these learned societies back, the British Association, the Royal Society, their problem was that they were so exclusive, right? You had to be independently wealthy already and be, a white English gentleman to be part of them. But and that was true, I mean, of all of British society, right? So that wasn't a problem specific to science.
I mean, that's
but you had all
any
these
famous
people
person, yeah, basically.
Yes, exactly. But you had all of these people who weren't career scientists, but contributing to science because they were interested in it. You had people experimenting in their back gardens or making little machines. All these things that we lost now because the only way to be a scientist is to do it professionally. And I don't mean just get paid for it. I mean, go through all the steps that endows you as a professional credentialed scientist. I think it's too bad. And I think like we've lost, like it's hard to mourn for a loss that we didn't even know that we had, but we've lost something. And I'd like to get it back for us all. I don't know. That's my harebrained scheme.
Okay. So basically the way it was a while ago, but accessible to anyone. That's kind of the general idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, my supervisor's going to hate that I talked to you. Now I'm going to have suggestions. But actually, I had one question. Is like, what did people like Dan Gilbert or Tali Sharot, who you mentioned the acknowledgements, like, did they comment at all, like, on the format or anything like that? Because I would imagine, like, I don't know either of them personally, but I would imagine that they're a bit more steeped in the tradition of publishing articles.
Yeah. It's funny if you read about Dan's life. He dropped out of high school. He toured around in a bus. Like he didn't. I mean, and toured is probably a generous word for what was going on. But like he didn't follow an established path to being a scientist. And I think one of the greatest living psychologists today. And yet he and I really disagree about like what a good future for science looks like. I mean, he shares, I think, some of my critiques of the system. And I won't speak for him here, but I can just speak to what we've disagreed about. And he told me about this recent paper, even when I was telling him how successful it had been. He's like, no one will actually take it seriously until it's in a journal and like people are building on it. And I just disagree. I think that's wrong. I think like more people have seen this article than they, probably by a factor of 10 than they would have otherwise. And it's not even like I think the measure of success for this paper is like somebody runs some follow-up. I want it to be useful to people. If it is, then they'll use it. And if it's not, then they'll move on. And if they move on, that's fine. Like that's what science is. And I'm like willing to take that risk. Like if the only reason people would use my findings is if they had the imprimatur of a journal on them, then like it's a cheap victory. It's not actually winning. Like that's not actually a person who knows how to deal with the evidence that they've been given, because there'd be no difference in quality of that evidence. So I guess I'm not trying to recruit sheep. I want to give people ideas that they can decide whether they're useful.
Yeah. Okay. I guess maybe the only comment I'd have then is that I did not have as I said, like I assumed that this was a way of getting the findings out, but that you were also doing, in quotation marks, actual paper. So actually, I would have also, not that I wouldn't have taken the findings seriously, but the preprint itself, almost not, because I would be waiting for the actual article in that sense. So I don't know, maybe that's a false expectation there.
Yeah.
But that would be my main comment why I might not have taken it seriously, maybe in that way.
Yeah. And this happens a lot naturally with like, you go to a conference and you see a talk, and like for whatever reason the talk sticks with you. And then you're writing a paper and you're like, oh, it makes sense to like cite that thing I saw at that conference a while back. Let me see if the paper's out. And if anyone felt that way about this paper and they're like, oh yeah, I want to like, and they think that there's going to be, the journal version of it, and they find that there's not, or they email me or something, and they're like, I'd be like, that's the paper. Like, I don't know, a journal might not like it if you cite it. Have you ever considered not publishing in one of them? They're stupid. Welcome to the dark side.
Yeah. Okay, but then just like one very, very boring question. I mean, when you apply, I mean, is the plan now you have a position and you hope by the end of that you've, through Substack or whatever, you're able to make a living, and or what's kind of, because, as I said, like it is kind of the thing, like not publishing this is a decision to basically substantially lower your chances of, unless you have like others, I guess you probably have other stuff that's going on that might lead to nice publications, but.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my dissertation paper under review at a fancy journal, and let's hope it comes out purely for the status reasons. But yeah, I mean, I'm applying for academic positions right now, and I'd love to be given a shot to show how this could work to people on the inside. And I certainly have a case that I would make to them that like, I think this is like worth trying, and I'm willing to take the risk to do it. And I think the upside is huge, and I think the upside to an institution is possibly huge. That like if this goes really well, then the institution where I call home like gets to benefit from that as well. And so, I mean, right now my record looks very conventional, and if they're willing to give me a shot off of that record, I'd then like to make the case to them, like if I start my position there, as to why I want to go in this direction in the future, and like the success that I've already had doing it. But if they don't want to go for it, like, yeah.
Okay, so the strategy is to kind of go in with, I'm trying something weird, just, give someone an outsider's shot, or like let someone try something unusual. And because you have such a very successful traditional career until then, it's not like you're some random person who walked in from the street, go like, hey, I wrote something, do you want to give me a job? Okay, so yeah, well, on the backdrop of that, okay, okay.
And we'll see, but like, isn't it weird that like what feels like the most revolutionary thing you can do in science today is just basically not follow a bunch of norms that pretty much everybody agrees are stupid? This isn't the world I thought I was entering when I like wanted to become a scientist. Like I thought, but it really does feel, I think, like the most important issue of our time. Like otherwise, you look around the field of psychology and it's like, what are the important questions right now? Like it's not that we don't study things that are worthwhile. Like we study topics that are worthwhile, but I think there's no agreement on like where we should be pointing our attention. It's just a bunch of people fighting to get people's attention. It doesn't really feel like progress is being made. Maybe that's just the way it feels to be in a field at any point. But I think if you look back at the past 20 years, like what do we have other than just a taller stack of papers? And if you looked into the next 20 years, like what do we expect to have other than a taller stack of papers? So it feels like we should be trying some high-risk strategies. And I wish I didn't have to be the one to take on the risk, but nobody else is doing it.
Yeah, one thing that always confused me was that I haven't been looking for this, but I don't know of anyone who made a YouTube video about their findings. I mean, you have like other people covering things, and I'm sure there's like, I had this at the beginning of the pandemic when, talks were no longer and that kind of stuff. And I thought like, wait a minute, why do I have to be invited to give a talk? I can just give a talk and then put it on YouTube. And I mean, I don't know, I haven't done it, probably because I don't know exactly how to do it. And it sounds like work, and I'm doing the podcast, etc. But this is, for me, it's like the big, like, YouTube is such a big platform with so many videos uploaded, and there is like popular science on there, but it's still from the traditional model of, we take something that's kind of slightly poppy and accessible, and then we talk about it the way they would on TV, rather than academics doing stuff. I mean, there are some, like I had Dan Quintana on the podcast, and he had like some tutorials where he walked people through, but that's still very different from saying like, here's my paper and presenting it as a video on YouTube. And yeah, it's kind of crazy to me that I still don't know of a single video like that.
Yeah. Like, I know some professors at Columbia Business School who had a video made about one of their findings, basically. I mean, it's easier because it's a finding about negotiation, and it's maybe more applicable. But I think that would be great. And I think if we took that seriously, if that was like a natural thing that people did, I think it would change the research that we would do, because there's so much research that we do that we would be embarrassed to tell the public about, because if you actually had to explain it in a way that they could understand it, they would see that it's a total waste of time. And so, I mean, this is what I think of as public science, of like doing science completely transparently, like give everybody the tools necessary to replicate what you did, explain it in a way that anyone who's interested can understand it. And in so doing, you also make it possible for more people to do science. Like, how could you learn how to do it if you can't see others doing it and learn from their example? Which is part of why I think it's such a perversion that so much of what we do is paywalled. Maybe it's different in Europe. I don't know. But like...
We don't subscribe to Elsevier anymore. In Europe. Apart from the university I'm at in Heidelberg, I think it's one of 2 German universities that still subscribes to Elsevier. So there's that.
They just want to light, a couple $1 million on fire to gain access to the research that should be free to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean. Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is okay. I mean, I knew it was going to be interesting talking to you, but I didn't realize fully how much kind of, not exactly philosophy, but how much thought went into the backdrop of why you published this on SciArchive the way you did. Because as I said, I just assumed this was like, you like writing, so you thought like, oh, let's write up a funny way of doing it, and then lots of people read it, and then I'll publish the article. I didn't realize that there was that much of a backdrop to it, and I guess
No, it's even dumber. It's even dumber than it looks.
Okay, well, that... you just want to revolutionize... I want to revolutionize science by... not publishing.
The stupidest way the stupidest way possible.
Yeah, but no, the reason why this seems like there's a bit more to it than I initially imagined is that, as I said, I basically try and see whatever I can find about my guests, and in your case I found the speech you gave when you had when you got this Rhodes Scholarship, and I don't know exactly what the speech was for or whatever. I don't know exactly what the context of that thing was, but you did kind of have this fairly impassioned, let's say, appeal to people to, if you're a Rhodes Scholar, don't just like go down the traditional path, but like do something with this, do something unusual. And I wanted to ask you anyway, whether you've been doing that, because I think you used the phrase, people should be stirring some shit up. And I was like, have you been doing that? But is that then maybe in line with that? Or
it's taking me a long time, but I feel like I've finally found my stirring stick.
Very good. And the pot in which,
and I mean, and I don't regret any of the things that I did so far. Like, I had a great experience in graduate school. I had the best advisor I could possibly have. I really lucked out in doing that. I mean, you and I know that's not a given. A lot of people have a bad time. So like, I'm glad that I did that. Like, I don't want to throw bombs just for the sake of throwing them. And I feel, I guess, thankful that like I found a thing that I think is worth throwing bombs at.
You found a good target.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so I mean, we've been talking now about revolutionizing the system, etc. But going back to some slightly more common ways of doing science, I mean, you had, as I mentioned, the article called "Do Conversations End When People Want Them to?" And I'm not sure, are you familiar with Betteridge's law of headlines?
Oh, is this like if it asks a question in the title, the answer is no?
Yeah, exactly. So your paper entitled, So you pretty much summarized the first. I copied it from Wikipedia. It says Betteridge's law of headlines is an adage that states any headline that ends in a question mark can be answered with the word no. So you have a paper called "Do Conversations End When People Want Them to?" And the answer is
the answer is no. Yes, Betteridge's law stands. Yes.
Yeah, so maybe, wondering whether you could like just briefly summarize kind of what you did in the paper, what you found, and then maybe also you mentioned that lots of the reports of that got it wrong. So kind of what people got wrong about it.
Yeah. So the idea behind this paper was people have conversations every day. Every conversation has to have an end. And that ending seems pretty fraught because, if you leave before the other person wants to leave, you risk offending them. If you stay too long, you risk trapping them, and they have the same fear about what they might do to you. And at the same time, people aren't very clear about what they want. And so basically we want to know, like, how do people land this plane, if at all? And there's a bunch of ways that it could happen. And it turns out none of those things are the way it does happen, because conversations don't end when people want them to. We found this in 2 studies. One, it was in the lab where we brought people in and had them talk as long as they wanted to, and then afterward report if there was a point when they wanted the conversation to end, and if so, when, and then guess the same thing for the other person. And people told us that the difference, I mean, they didn't tell us, so we did this calculation, but the difference between what people wanted and what they got was about half of the length of their conversation. So which doesn't mean that they wanted to talk half as long, because some people wanted to talk longer. And that's the big thing that so much of the reporting got wrong, is everybody assumed that we found that people want to get out of their conversation sooner. And it actually turns out to be a really difficult question to answer. Like, on average, did they want to go sooner? Well, the answer is yes, by a little bit. If you look at the percentage of people who said they wanted to go sooner versus later, it is the majority. But if you think about what it means to say that you wanted to continue, that's different from telling us how many minutes earlier you wanted to go, because one is a prediction and the other is a report on your experience. So it's hard to make those things commensurate.
So you mean like you because you know exactly when you want it to end, but you don't know exactly how much longer you would. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. So like, you ate a bowl of ice cream. How much less ice cream did you want to eat? Well, like half a bowl. How much more ice cream did you want to eat? I can guess that it would be another bowl, but I might be wrong. And another problem with making these things commensurate is if we talk for 10 minutes, I can only tell you that I wanted to go up to 10 minutes sooner. I can't tell you a negative number, but I can tell you that I wanted to continue. I mean, we let people say they wanted to continue for up to an hour, but, theoretically they could have told us they wanted to go on forever. So one of these is bounded and the other isn't. It's unclear how we could put these on the same scale. All of which is to say, like, yes, it does tend in the direction of people saying that they wanted to go sooner, but I think really the solid finding is people wanted to go at a different time than they did. Because still about a third of people said that they wanted the conversation to continue. And by the way, these results are identical when we survey people about the last conversation that they had, which is overwhelmingly with people that they know really well. So this isn't just about talking to a stranger for the first time. This also happens in people's living rooms. And we found it happens for 2 reasons, at least 2 reasons. One is people don't want to talk for the same amount of time. So it's really hard to both get what we want if I want to go at a different time than you want to go. And 2, people don't know when the other person wants to leave. So when we had people guess when the other person wanted to leave, they were off by 60% of the length of their conversation. And again, that's absolute value. So they underestimate on average a little bit, but mostly they're just off. And so if I don't know what you want and we don't want the same things, it's very unlikely that we're going to get what we want. And that seems to be 2 critical reasons why conversations don't end when people want them to.
Yeah. Okay, but so good. The main misunderstandings were really not that it's just like whether it's more or less, rather than people reporting that they just wanted it to be less.
Yes. Yes. And so all these articles that were like, oh, conversations go on too long, which isn't what we found mainly. Some of the articles too were like conversations on the phone go on too long, which is nowhere in the paper. All these conversations were face to face. All this data was gathered before the pandemic. But then what you find when there's a lot of media coverage is a lot of the media coverage is of the other media coverage. And so people start writing articles based on the original wrong article.
You change like a small detail here and there, and then, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's a game of telephone. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what I found this part actually, it's kind of funny that they misrepresented this, because yours is one of the first paper where I regularly saw discussions about what the mean means in your paper. Like I rarely remember seeing a paper that really said like, well, the mean is this, but actually that doesn't really mean that much because, some people want to be longer, some less, so it averages out more or less. So it's kind of funny that they didn't pick up on that, because it's a pretty big part of your results section.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not like you're hiding that.
The people writing these articles, yeah, I mean, are they going to, read deep into the results section to like really understand it?
Yeah. I'm curious. So you mentioned on your website that your the article got covered by media, and you mentioned the holy trinity of science, namely the journal Nature, Science, and Jimmy Kimmel. I'm wondering, did any of those get in? How does that like? Do they get in touch with you before? Do they just like report on it, or like do they ask you like some questions about it, or?
I forget what Science and Nature did. There were places that like interviewed me, or I think it might have been Nature that like commissioned a professor to like write a commentary on it, basically. But yeah, Jimmy Kimmel I never heard from. I just got a text one day that someone was like, "Oh, they mentioned your paper on the show last night."
Like what?
And yeah, and like they don't mention our names. They're just like, researchers at Harvard found that something conversation, and then it was like some terrible joke. Yeah,
or even like Harvard University found. I always love when it's like, yeah, especially like if I consider now because I'm in Heidelberg and it's just like I'm just in a room. Like the university, like I'm just a dude in a room talking to other people in the adjacent room, right? Like this, I'm not exactly sure what the university is doing here, other than providing that room. But yeah, um, but yeah, very simple or very generic question, but I was curious about in this case, which is like kind of how the idea for the article came about, because it seems like such a, in the positive way, really seems like a kind of question a child might ask. Because it's like so simple. It's like about one of the basics of. I mean, I don't know. Like, so I don't know like the literature on conversations, right? I don't know how much. There's probably lots of it, but this seems like such a simplistic and almost naive question to ask. I'm just curious. Like, how did that come about, and how did you decide to pursue it? Then also.
It really seems like a theme in my research career is like just be really dumb, and it seems to work out. Like. Yeah, it is such a basic question. It is wild that we don't have an answer to it. But also our field is really young. And I think, we have very quickly moved on to all these questions that we need all these sophisticated methods and analytic techniques to answer. But like there are still very dumb questions that we don't know the answers to. Where this came from was both tons of conversations with Dan, my advisor, but and this may be anachronistic. Is that the right word? Whatever it is. But sort of the way I remember this happening is I was at Oxford before I started my PhD. I was putting on my bow tie for a party because every party there is black tie. And I just remember thinking, like, I don't want to go to this party because I know inevitably I'm going to be talking to somebody and then I'm going to want to be done and go talk to somebody else. And there won't be like a graceful way of executing that maneuver. Unless your drink is empty, right? Like that's the one kind of out that you have. And then I was like, wait, why do I think that I uniquely am the one who wants to leave? What if we both want to go, but we're both trapped there because we think the other person wants to stay? So like I had the same idea that all of these media articles had after running the study. The difference was after running the study, I knew that I was wrong.
That's good. You learned something.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine spending 4 years and thousands of dollars and all these participants' time and to learn something is pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I just find it really interesting because I'm also like now in the final stage of writing about an article that also seems to be like so simple about some of the basic thing in the field, and sometimes it just feels like you're like number one, I always had this feeling like someone must have done this before, like I must have just not found it. And the other part is also like, in a way, we think this is a really cool thing because it's about a basic property of it, and it has sometimes pretty large effect. But so that's like really exciting. But also, it's like this is like such a simple question. Like they could easily reject it, saying like, "Come on, guys, really? That's your question? Like this is your big finding?" So I don't know. It was kind of nice seeing someone else also ask a very simple question.
Yeah. If the journal says no, have you tried not publishing in journal?
Yeah, I'm not sure how that's going to go down with my supervisor. But also, I mean, to be fair, for me, it's also a thing like this is for me like the one from the things I'm doing during my PhD where I have the highest hopes of it, being accepted into a prestigious journal. And yeah, if I want to get a postdoc, it would help.
No, I get it.
But yeah, I mean, to be fair, I never really considered it, to be honest. That's maybe the interesting thing about talking to you today is that I've gained an entire new way of ruining my career now that I hadn't even considered before.
Yeah, this one's more fun.
Yeah, exactly.
And look, you can always like publishing it. I think the right way is not inconsistent with publishing it in the hated way that we all do. Like you can do both. Like you expected me to do. Like I could have done it. I just could not bring myself to write the worst version of that article. We tried. Ethan and I tried to write it, and it just felt so bad that we couldn't do it. So
no, I mean,
maybe that is a gateway drug.
Yeah, and I will also say, like, if I ever, let's say, in some hypothetical scenario, this podcast, it ends up paying a lot of money, then sure, I'll be with you. If I don't need a salary, then
I know how it goes. You got to eat.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I had a brief question about the kind of what you make kind of the consequences of the conversations paper. So, I mean, this idea that conversations don't usually end when people want them to. Now, on face value, this seems like it's sucks. Like it's a pretty bad aspect of life because, something we do a lot seems to never really be satisfactory, at least with this in regard to this one aspect. But I'm just curious, like whether there might be like some real benefits to this. And just to give like 2 examples, like if it takes, let's say that the conversation takes longer than you want it to. I mean, often I feel like getting exactly what you want to is not the best idea because you often don't know what you should want, right? And like sometimes you're in a conversation and then, it only becomes interesting 10 minutes after you kind of would have left if you could have already. And then in the reverse, it's also like if the conversation is shorter than you want to. I think this is like from theater, or I guess this is like in any kind of entertainment, like you want to leave people wanting more. You don't want, you kind of want people to leave the experience to go like, I wish that continued, right? But you don't actually want it to continue, right? Until you get bored with it. So I'm just curious, like what you make of that. Kind of what it means.
Yeah, it did turn out that the people who say that they wanted to leave the conversation before it ended enjoyed that conversation less. I mean, that the causality can obviously go either way. Maybe that is why they, but there was no difference. I mean, these are smaller groups, so we don't have as much power to detect a difference if there was one, but we couldn't detect any difference between the people who were left wanting more and the people who got exactly what they wanted. Which I think goes to show that, like, I mean, we went in thinking that getting cut off was bad. To leave a conversation thinking that, like, oh, I wanted to talk to them more than they wanted to talk to me seems like an aversive state to be in. But I agree with you. I think it is, and it could be that some people felt that way and some people felt what you just described, which was, I was left wanting more. I could have danced all night. I feel so good. We don't know. But I think both things are possible. And so, yeah, it's hard for me to say, like what the takeaway from this paper is, other than like now we understand that the ends of conversations are a train wreck that everyone experiences and then mostly enjoys. Because like it, I think like it could have benefits, it could not, and I think you'd really have to do more to figure out like which it is. Yeah, and I feel now I can feel on it, like honestly telling you that most of the time when people interviewed me about that paper after it initially came out, when I was in a different state of mind about science, I had to pretend that like, yes, and now we know how to like have good conversations. We don't. Like, I have an additional fact for you about how conversations work. I think it's pretty counterintuitive. It certainly isn't what we expected. And for me, that's all I really seek from science. Like, I think it's really hard to actually give people actionable advice. Like, you really have to run a lot of studies before you should feel comfortable telling people to do something differently than what they're doing right now. But you only need to run one study to change people's understanding about something. And that's what I hope to do the most. And that's what psychology has done for me so far. Like, I became a psychologist in part because I read my advisor, Dan Gilbert. I read his book that was all about how people are bad at predicting what will make them happy. So. Yes. And like, it doesn't mean that like that happens in every situation all the time. And like, you should live differently knowing that. It just gave me a sense of peace, knowing that the bad things in my life probably won't turn out to be as bad as I think they will be. And those feelings won't last as long. So what do I do differently about that? I don't know. Just live a better life, which is pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's also like, it's enough for a paper to establish one thing. You don't have to establish the consequences of that thing and, all sorts of other things. You kind of just said you don't know how we become better conversationalists or have better conversations. And but I was kind of just curious, just because we did talk about it at the beginning with the affordances / doorknobs in conversations. Yeah, and I guess you've probably also done a fair amount of reading about conversations, at least some stuff that I'm completely unaware of. So I'm just curious, like, what would you say makes for a good conversation or a good conversationalist, or what can we do differently? Yeah.
It's funny that like my answer to this question is going to be mainly based on intuition rather than anything that I've read. Mainly. I think part one would be what has been found in various studies, which is like, you should probably just have them. They are more enjoyable than people expect them to be. That effect seems to be pretty robust. I find it in my own studies too. So like, worry about them less. And I think in a conversation, like the key to having a conversation is just like listen more, strategize less, like think about yourself less, try to create and look for those affordances. But really, like, conversations are really cognitively loading. I don't think you can do much strategizing on top of them. And so I think the more that you are in the moment and paying attention to the person, picking up on the affordances that they create and trying to make affordances for them, probably the better that you're going to do. And I guess if there's one more thing, it is that I think a mistake people make, and I think there's some evidence to back this up, is worrying too much about being intimate with someone else, like sharing additional information. But we know from other research that this is actually the way that relationships form, that I reveal something a little bit more intimate about me and you do the same. And, we build up this fast friends paradigm. This appeared in the New York Times as like the 40 questions to fall in love, but it is actually a way of making people friends with each other in the lab. But like, you can't start that positive cascade unless you're willing to open a little bit. And if they don't do the same, and people are, I think, afraid of not being reciprocated, but those fears are generally overhyped. Or overblown.
But I think also the key word here is escalating sharing intimacies, not just going full throttle into it. You step by step.
Yes, no, don't begin with, I killed my grandfather. What do you think? Although that's a conversation I'd be interested to have, although through some bulletproof glass.
I was about to say, yeah. You might want to have some distance to the person. Okay, I mean, change of topic here now. Kind of last few questions is just, I'm curious, some general kind of advice. I guess part of why I'm doing this podcast is because I can learn from people who are one or two steps often ahead of me. And maybe we can start this by, I'm just curious, like, I mean, you've mentioned Dan Gilbert is it Gilbert or Joe? It's Gilbert, right?
Yeah.
You've mentioned him a few times now because he was your PhD supervisor. And I don't know, like, what's something that you learned specifically from him, or maybe something you think that he does particularly well, or I don't know.
Yeah. When I started my PhD, in our first meeting, Dan told me, he was like, someone asked me recently, what % of my life goals have I achieved? And I told him 140%. I've done more than I ever thought that I would. And I don't feel like I have anything to prove, I just want to have fun. So let's just talk about interesting ideas. And that's what we did for the first 6 months of my PhD. And then we'd often talk about an idea and kind of talk it to death. And we'd be like, okay, not that one. Sometimes he'd be more likely to say that than me. And as you could see, that I was getting a little frustrated that we weren't starting a research project. He told me the story of him talking to his advisor, Ned Jones. Dan came in one day with this idea he was all excited about, and he tells it to Ned, and Dan goes, okay, do you think it would work? And Ned goes, yep. And Dan's like, okay, should we do it? And Ned goes, nope. And he's like, why? And Ned's like, because it's not worth our time. And that was a very illustrative story for me, because no one had ever put it explicitly that something could be an experiment could work and not be worth running. And that's something that obviously when you say it, people will agree with it. But I have found when I talk to other people about it that there's this idea that basically just do your first idea. And I think you instead should, I have a document on my computer called the Ideas Graveyard that is filled with all of the ideas that I've discussed or somehow thought about that I haven't done. And I think basically you should throw away almost every idea you ever think, because these ideas really matter and good ones are hard to find. And the only way that you find them is by looking really hard for them. And that looks like generating a lot of ideas and throwing out all the ones that are terrible. That has served me well so far.
Do you do that intentionally? Is it something you do sitting down to, I don't know, let's say you're finishing a project and, well, I don't know, do you always have projects going and then how do you then come up with new ideas
as time goes on, your pipeline gets fuller and fuller, right? And exactly. So you are generating fewer ideas. So you maybe need to do less of this. It's much more important at the beginning, but really it's something that's less intentional and more just being honest with myself, that just do I really want to commit to this idea for the 4 years it's going to take to finish it? And the answer is almost always no. I don't want to just make a paper to make a paper. I'm going to marry this idea, basically. And I don't want to get married to someone I hate. That's a recipe for being depressed. Yeah, it may be even worse.
Yeah, at least you can revel in the hatred.
Yeah, and at least you can be okay, I hate this, but it's going to be over. But I think some a mediocre idea, you always keep hoping that it will be good, and it always keeps disappointing you. That is worse. Yeah, so that is the advice that I would give: is throw away most of your ideas. And then I guess from my more recent experience is be dumb. There's actually a great piece on this. My friends Slimeold Timeold wrote it, called The Scientific Virtues, and the first one is stupidity. And at first, when I read that piece at first, I disagreed with it. And now I've come to think of it as the most important thing that I've read in a very long time.
Wasn't there, sorry to interrupt, but wasn't there like a commentary in, I don't know what journal, like in academic journals, and it was called something like The Importance of Stupidity for Research. And this fairly senior academic, I think, said like most of my main findings came because I was really dumb and messed something up or something like that. I can't remember. I'll see if I can find it and put it in the description. But yeah.
Yeah, I totally believe it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's something that I and many of the listeners can definitely feel like we can achieve. That's one of the pieces of advice that feels very, it's within grasp.
I agree.